Rome, in the late stages of World War II, was a city of fear, deprivation, and resistance. Little food reached the city, and the people had fallen from one dictatorship to another, a military occupation. After the fall of Mussolini in 1943, German forces occupied the city, enforcing martial law and imposing their iron grip on daily life. The once grand capital of Italy became a place of whispered rumors, hidden alliances, and growing desperation. Hi, my name is Andrea, and I'd like to tell you a story. If you like what you hear, please like, comment, and maybe subscribe. Following the Italian armistice with the Allies in September 1943, German troops rapidly took control of Rome. The occupation marked the beginning of a widespread persecution, particularly targeting Jews, political dissenters, and resistance members. The streets of Rome, bustling with life before the war, became a theater of violence and suppression. Curfews were imposed, rations were strictly enforced, and the once vibrant social life, even under fascist rule, dwindled into silence. Food scarcity became a defining feature of life under occupation. Bread, pasta, and other staples were heavily rationed, and black market dealings flourished despite the danger. Residents scavenged for food, and families grew gardens in whatever space they could find. Hunger was a constant companion, exacerbated by the Germans' requisitions of supplies for their war effort. An anonymous resident recalled, "We lived in constant fear. At any moment, a German patrol could stop you. They demanded your papers, searched your belongings, or worse, dragged you away without explanation." This pervasive fear was particularly acute for Rome's Jewish community, who faced deportation after the Gestapo began implementing the final solution in Italy. Many of those who were captured were brought to a grim building in Via Tasso, not only a place of detention, but a symbol of the relentless cruelty of the Nazi occupation of Rome. Located in a residential neighborhood, the building exterior, pretty neutral to the eye, gave no hint to the horrors contained within. Inside, the atmosphere was one of despair and agony, a place where the Gestapo and SS carried out systematic oppression and cruelty. Originally designed as an apartment complex, the building was transformed by the Nazis to suit their sinister purpose. The spacious rooms were converted into cramped cells with minimal ventilation. The Gestapo divided the building into interrogation rooms, offices, and holding cells, creating a labyrinthine structure designed to disorient and terrify its occupants. Prisoners were often blindfolded, further enhancing their fear and confusion. The cells were uniformly oppressive, small, damp, and devoid of any comfort. Prisoners described the walls as cold and clammy, with the only furniture being a straw mattress on the floor, and in some cases, nothing at all. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and blood, making it difficult to breathe. Prisoners at Via Tasso came from all walks of life. Resistance fighters, political activists, Jews, and ordinary citizens accused of subversive activities. They all found themselves in the clutches of the Gestapo. Some were arrested for sheltering partisans or allied soldiers, while others were captured in random roundups. Families were often unaware of their loved ones' fates, as prisoners were held without trial and their whereabouts kept secret. One survivor, Cesira Caselli, recounted her first moments in the prison. Quote, "The guards shoved me into a cell where 3 women were already crammed together. We had no room to lie down, and the smell was unbearable. I remember hearing screams from the interrogation rooms and wondering if I'd survive the night." End quote. The interrogations at Via Tasso were meticulously brutal, conducted by officers who took pleasure in their cruelty. Prisoners were subjected to a variety of tortures, including beatings with rubber truncheons, waterboarding, and electrocution. The Nazis often forced detainees into stress positions for hours or days, leading to excruciating pain and permanent physical damage. Psychological torture was equally prevalent. Prisoners were isolated for days, denied food and water, or told that their families would be harmed if they did not cooperate. The Gestapo interrogators played mind games, offering false promises or release or leniency, only to deny them at the last moment. Many testimonies of Via Tasso have survived. Let's take Rosario Bentivegna, a partisan fighter. He described the conditions. Quote, "The cells were small, barely enough for one person, but often crammed with 3 or 4. The air was foul, and the only light came from a small barred window high on the wall. Every sound from the corridors filled us with dread because we knew it meant someone was being taken for interrogation." End quote. And again from Maria Teresa Regard, arrested for her resistance activities. Quote, "They would beat us until we lost consciousness. Then, when we came to, they'd start again. Sometimes they brought in family members and threatened to hurt them if we didn't talk. It was a level of inhumanity I never thought possible." End quote. King of this castle of despair was Herbert Kappler, SS officer and head of security for Rome's occupation. Kappler was notoriously ruthless. Survivors and historians alike have described him as calculating and sadistic. His direct involvement in interrogations ensured that the prison reputation as a place of terror was well deserved. One infamous tactic employed under Kappler's direction was to pit prisoners against one another. Detainees were sometimes forced to overhear the torture of their comrades or family members, breaking their will to resist. Kappler also oversaw the meticulous documentation of every interrogation, creating a chilling bureaucratic record of suffering. By controlling the information that each prisoner was exposed to during the interrogation of their fellow inmates, Kappler created a world of suspect where everyone and anyone could be betrayed at any moment, making it easier for prisoners to cut a deal that often led them to even more suffering. Despite the oppressive conditions, acts of defiance were not uncommon. Prisoners carved messages into the walls of their cells, leaving behind evidence of their existence and resistance, messages that can still be seen on the wall today. Some smuggled out letters with information to aid the resistance outside. The courage of these individuals is exemplified by a message found on the cell wall after the liberation of the prison. Quote, "Even in this darkness we fight. Rome will be free." End quote. Today, the building at Via Tasso stands as a museum, dedicated to preserving the memory of those who suffered and died within its walls. The cells remain largely intact, their walls bearing the inscriptions left by the prisoners. Visitors can see the stark contrast between the ordinary facade of the building and the horrors that occurred inside. Despite the terror, Rome's spirit of resistance persisted. Those who fought in the streets were part of the GAP, the Gruppi di Azione Patriottica, patriotic action groups. These men and women carried out sabotage missions, assassinations of German officers, and bombings of strategic sites. Ordinary citizens also engaged in acts of defiance. These actions came at great personal risk, as capture often meant imprisonment at Via Tasso or less infamous but still similar locations. With Rome turned into a city of suspicion, populated by spies turning on each other to avoid persecution, The Gestapo's network of informers made trust a rare commodity. Diaries and letters from the period reveal the pervasive paranoia that gripped the population. One such diary entry from 1944 reads, quote, "We no longer speak freely, not even in our homes. The walls have ears, and any careless word could lead to Viatasso. We have learned to smile at those we fear and whisper our prayers at night." End quote. On March 23, 1944, members of the Roman resistance carried out a bold and deadly attack against the German forces in the heart of the city. A group of partisans from the GAP, Gruppi di Azione Patriottica, ambushed a column marching through Via Rasella, a narrow street in central Rome. The resistance fighters planted a bomb concealed in a rubbish cart, timing its detonation to coincide with the passage of the soldiers. The explosion was devastating. 33 German soldiers were killed instantly, and several others were wounded. Civilians in the vicinity were also injured by the blast. The attack was a direct response to the Nazi occupation and their increasingly oppressive measures in the city. The idea was to try and aid the Allied force tied in the wider Battle of Anzio that would rage between January 22 and May 26, by convincing the Germans with violence that moving supplies through the city was not a good idea. One of the partisans involved, Carla Caponi, later recalled the moments leading up to the attack. Quote, "We knew the risks. Each of us understood that the consequences would be terrible, but we also knew that resistance meant action, even at the cost of our lives." The Via Rasella attack enraged the German command. Herbert Kappler and General Kurt Malzer demanded swift and brutal retribution to demonstrate the consequence of defying Nazi authority. This is the tragic story of the massacre at the Fosse Ardeatine. In retaliation for the partisan attack in Via Rasella, German authorities swiftly issued a decree. For every German soldier killed, 10 Italian civilians would be executed. The grim arithmetic led to the death of 335 people, a number that exceeded the initial calculation of 330 due to bureaucratic errors. The selection process for the victims was brutal and systematic, yet marked by a degree of chaos that amplified the cruelty. Herbert Kappler compiled the list of those to be executed. The majority of the victims were drawn from the ranks of political prisoners held at Viatasso and Regina Coeli. However, not all the victims were political prisoners. Kappler's list also included Jewish detainees arrested during the ongoing persecution, as well as individuals who were just picked up arbitrarily in the streets. In some cases, innocent civilians were seized simply to meet the required quota. Witnesses later recounted that some victims had been detained for minor infractions or on baseless accusations. The indiscriminate nature of the selection added another layer of horror to the massacre to be. Numerous testimonies from survivors and those who witnessed the events leading up to the massacre provide harrowing insights. One of the accounts comes from a prison guard at Viatasso who observed the chaotic compilation of the list. Quote, "Names were added and crossed out at random. It seemed as though they were trying to fill a ledger rather than decide human lives." End quote. An eye-opening testimony was later provided by Eugenio Calò, a partisan captured and executed at the Fosse Ardeatine. In a letter smuggled out of prison before his death, he wrote, quote, "If my life is the price for freedom, then I give it willingly. Remember us not for how we died, but for why we fought." End quote. This letter has since become a poignant symbol of the resistance sacrifice. While Kapler, in the following trial after the war, tried to downplay his involvement in the massacre, his own skillful record-keeping betrayed him, revealing proof that he had overseen every step, ensuring people would be efficiently brought to the location and later executed. On March 24, 1944, the 335 victims were transported in trucks to the Fosse Ardeatine, an ancient series of catacombs located at the outskirts of Rome. The site was chosen for its isolation, ensuring that the massacre could be conducted away from public view and foreign intervention. Upon arrival, the prisoners were blindfolded and led into the caves in groups of 5. Each group was forced to kneel before being executed with a gunshot to the back of the head. The executioners worked with ruthless precision, moving methodically from group to group. Witnesses and later investigations revealed that some victims were still alive when the caves were sealed with explosives, as the Germans attempted to cover their own tracks. The traces of the massacre remained hidden until Rome's liberation in June 1944. When the site was uncovered, the extent of the atrocity shocked both Italians and Allied forces. The bodies were exhumed and their identities were painstakingly confirmed through personal effects and forensic analysis. The massacre's discovery sparked outrage and led to international condemnation. For the families of the victims, the pain was immeasurable. Many had clung to hope that their loved ones were still alive, only to learn of their horrific fate months later. The Fosse Ardeatine is now a national monument and a site of pilgrimage for those who wish to honor the memory of the victims. The caves have been preserved as they were found, with the remains of the victims now in a solemn mausoleum. Each victim's name is inscribed at the site, a permanent reminder of the lives lost and the resilience of the Italian people in the face of tyranny. But the story was not over. History is made by sources, sometimes written, sometimes oral. And memory is a complicated thing. Alessandro Portelli's seminal work, L'ordine è già stato eseguito, The Order was already executed, delves into the intricate web of memory, history, and collective trauma surrounding the Fosse Ardeatine massacre. Central to the book is the controversy that sparked debate among historians, survivors, and the public. Did the Germans issue a warning about their plan for retaliation, or was the massacre carried out without prior notice? Some accounts claim that the Germans distributed flyers and posters around Rome following the Via Rasella attack, warning the population that a retaliation would occur if those responsible for the ambush did not surrender. According to this narrative, the flyers served as a grim ultimatum, placing the blame of the massacre on the partisans who orchestrated the attack and then did not show up to take the consequences. However, Portelli's research challenges this claim, suggesting that these supposed warnings are a product of collective memory rather than a historical fact. In his analysis, he uncovers that while there is testimony attesting to the existence of such warnings, no concrete evidence has been found to corroborate these accounts. Instead, the actual posters and announcements made by the Germans after the massacre stated, as the title of Portelli's book poignantly captures, "The order has already been executed." Portelli's exploration reveals the complexity of memory, particularly in a community grappled with a collective trauma. He cites testimonies from survivors and witnesses who insist that they saw warning posted throughout the city. These accounts, however, often conflict with one another and lack specificity. One testimony referenced by Portelli comes from a Roman shopkeeper who vividly described a flyer. It said that if the partisans didn't turn themselves in, the Germans would take revenge. I remember the bold letters. It was impossible to miss. Yet, archival evidence fails to validate such claims, raising questions about the reliability of this memory. The actual posters distributed after the massacre were not warnings but declarations. The German explicitly announced the execution of 335 individuals, stating that the action was a response to deaths of German soldiers in Via Rasella. The language was cold and bureaucratic, underscoring the calculated nature of the atrocity. The text made it clear that the massacre was done, with no room for negotiation and surrender. Portelli argues that the discrepancy between the historical record and the testimonies reflects a broader phenomenon, the creation of historical fictions within collective memory. In this case, the idea of preemptive warnings may have emerged from gossip, misunderstandings, or a psychological need to rationalize the events. By imagining that the Germans had issued warnings, some survivors might have sought to align culpability to the partisans rather than confronting the stark reality of Nazi brutality. The order was already executed. Gossip and oral history can shape and distort collective memory. In the aftermath of the massacre, rumors spread rapidly throughout Rome. These rumors, combined with the chaotic nature of wartime communication, may have contributed to the belief in warnings that never existed. Over time, these narratives became ingrained in the collective consciousness, blurring the line between fact and fiction. The debate over the existence of German warnings is more than an academic question. It reflects deeper tensions about accountability and the nature of resistance against tyranny. Critics of the partisans have used the supposed warnings to argue that Via Rasella was a reckless attack, even an act of terrorism, and suggested that the partisans knowingly provoked a massacre. On the other hand, those who reject the existence of warnings view the massacre as an unprovoked act of Nazi barbarism, placing the blame squarely on the occupiers. Portelli's analysis underscores the importance of examining these narratives critically. By deconstructing the myth of the warnings, he highlights the dangers of relying on unverified memories to shape historical understanding. At the same time, he acknowledges the emotional power of these memories and the role in the shaping of collective identity. I hope you enjoyed this little excursion in one of the darkest corners of Rome's history, and I'll see you soon. Have a good one.